Texas women's basketball falls just short of the Final Four. Texas baseball struggles in Lubbock, and one of the most exciting NFL off seasons rolls along. All this and more on College Press Box. Good evening and welcome into College Press Box. I'm your host, Jason Kinander, and we have a great show for you tonight. Over the weekend, Texas women's basketball traveled to Spokane, Washington with hopes of avenging last season's Elite Eight loss by advancing to their first Final Four under head coach Vic Schaefer. Things looked promising after a Friday Sweet 16 win over Ohio State, but the Longhorns would have to knock off a true Goliath, one-seed Stanford, to clinch a Final Four berth. Let's send it down to Spokane to see how things played out. First scoring play of the game, Stanford's Haley Jones with the turnaround jump shot to get the Cardinal on the board, but Rory Harmon, the freshman phenom for Texas, little shifty move with the crossover, pull-up J, smooth 4-2. Texas would try to keep pace with Stanford throughout the early portion of this game. Here's Harmon facilitating the ball, moving it for the three. Joanne Allen Taylor to give the Horns a 4-point lead. 1-point lead for Texas towards the end of the first quarter. There's an inside layup by Lexi Hull to give the Cardinal the lead again. Back and forth game in the early stages. 25-24 now when Fran Beliebe picks up the loose ball and finds the bottom of the basket. Texas trying to get back into the game, but Stanford would start to pull away a little bit. Here's a Cameron Brink and one to make it a 8-point Stanford lead. Texas would roar back on the back of freshman phenom Rory Harmon. We promise you this is not a Rory Harmon highlight film, but it sure looks like it. There's the first jumper. Harmon with the contested layup. That one goes. Harmon working even harder to try to get Texas back in the game, driving hard, and the foul to pull Texas within one, but Stanford would fight back once again. Here's Beliebe, rips the ball away, throws it outside, gets it back in the post for the strong finish. Texas trying to get on the board again, but Stanford coming up with the steal. Here is Lexi Hull on the three, assisted by Haley Jones. Stanford would lead by 6. 5-point lead now, 2 minutes to go. Texas trying to keep pace. It's Hull driving to the rim. The foul. The game would be out of reach for Texas at that point. Stanford would dribble out the clock, making it to their second consecutive Final Four. Texas just short of their first Final Four under Vic Schaefer. I'm now lucky to be joined by our women's basketball analyst, Carter Yates. Carter, thank you as always for stopping by.
Happy to be here, Jason.
So Texas had a hard-fought game again in the Elite Eight, but could not come out on top. What was the difference in this one?
Texas had the Cardinal exactly where they wanted them on the defensive end. The Longhorns' swarming press defense caused a lot of problems for a Stanford team that was second in the Pac-12 this season in scoring offense with 74 points per game. Stanford shot 19 for 51 from the field all night and hit nearly 17% of their three-point attempts. The Texas defense made Stanford's veteran ball handlers panic, forcing 20 turnovers. The problem for the Longhorns was that they just allowed far too many offensive rebounds and got in crippling foul trouble throughout the game. Stanford out-rebounded Texas 45-28 on the night, including 12 offensive rebounds that kept possessions alive and mitigated the Cardinals' poor shooting performances. Stanford also shot 18 for 22 from the free throw line as Texas players such as freshman guard Aaliyah Moore and sophomore forward Deanna Gaston were limited to 10 minutes and 13 minutes respectively on the night while they battled foul trouble. On the flip side for Texas, they shot only 11 for 20 from the free throw line. Frankly, Texas did a great job of limiting Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year Cameron Brink to 10 points on offense, but Brink had 6 blocks on the game, part of her team's 11 blocks, and Texas is 1. Part of the reason there's such a disparity is because Texas' front court didn't have their best overall performance. As I mentioned before, Moore and Gaston weren't able to play much due to foul trouble, and center Lauren Ebo went 0 for 6 from the field in 39 minutes of action. Texas had the defensive game plan to hang with one of the nation's best teams, but they got out-rebounded, suffered from foul trouble to their front court players, and weren't able to capitalize on those precious free throw attempts.
Always comes down to free throw shooting, doesn't it, Carter? So what do we make of Vic Schaefer's second season now that it is in the rear view?
Well, let's take a look at what Vic Schaefer has accomplished in his first 2 seasons with Texas. He has a 50-17 overall record, 2 straight Elite Eight appearances, and a Big 12 postseason tournament championship. This season, the Longhorns finished with their most wins since 2015-2016. Out of all the athletic programs at the University of Texas, the women's basketball team has the best future outlook because of Schaefer's recruiting and massive overachievement in the first 2 seasons. Last year, the Longhorns were a bit of a surprise Elite 8 team. They were only 11-7 in the Big 12 Conference and were a 6th seed in the tournament. But this year, they were a true number 2 seed, won the Big 12, and had a great run that only came to an end after playing one of the best teams in the nation in Stanford. Watching this team, you can start to see Schaefer's culture taking root. He got a lot of help in shaping the culture by inheriting upperclassmen such as Joanne Allen-Taylor, Lauren Ebo, and Audrey Warren, who bought into his message, but he's also brought in underclassmen such as Rory Harmon, who are buying into the press defense and physical nature of Texas basketball. Schaefer is also similar to men's basketball coach Chris Beard in that he is trying to reinvigorate the Texas student body around the basketball program. Schaefer did a great job at the end of the regular season in partnering with the Neighborhood Longhorns program to get 12,000 plus fans in the stands. Texas women's basketball wasn't drawing big crowds throughout the season, mainly averaging just over 2,500 fans per game, but Schaefer publicly pleading with the student body and then partnering with the Neighborhood Longhorn program, not to mention a second Elite 8 appearance, helped to energize the student body and rally them around the Longhorns.
Really appreciate everything that Coach Schaefer is doing to bring interest to the women's basketball program. Now looking towards next season, let's hear an early roster breakdown, although it is early, for next season.
Well, the main focal point for this Texas team next season will be point guard Rory Harmon. Harmon came in as the number 10 player in the class of 21 and was the Texas Gatorade Player of the Year in high school, and she more than lived up to the hype in her first season in Burnt Orange. The 5'6" guard earned Big 12 Freshman of the Year and was put on the All Big 12 second team, defensive team, and freshman team. She emerged this season as the Texas floor general and was one of the most consistent players with 11.4 points per game and 5 assists per game. The team's leading scorer, Aaliyah Matharu, will be returning for her senior year, although she cooled off immensely in the second half of the year and in the tournament, scoring in double figures in 4 of the last 15 games. Texas also has promising forwards in Deanna Gasson and Aaliyah Moore returning. Now, I can't say enough about how much the loss of senior guard Joanne Allen-Taylor could hurt the Longhorns. She embodied everything Schaefer loved in a player and was the coach on the court for Texas. She struggled mightily shooting this year, but her intensity and drive set the tone for the rest of the Texas team, and she was integral in helping to develop Vic Schaefer's culture at Texas. Senior guard and forward Audrey Warren was another junkyard dog type player that was not afraid to get physical on defense and dive for loose balls. Not to mention the fact that she was versatile on the floor and being able to defend the post as well as the perimeter. The final senior Texas will need to replace is center Lauren Ebo, who led the Longhorns in rebounding with a 6.7 boards per game and matched up consistently against the opposing team's most imposing post presence. Vic Schaefer also just signed the number 6 recruiting class in the nation with 3 intriguing prospects. Texas is bringing in another guard to help ease the loss of Joanne Allen-Taylor and 6'1" guard Jordana Codio out of Montverde Academy. Schaefer has said her length and athleticism could allow her to play multiple positions and receive early playing time. The next recruit is Amina Muhammad, a 6'4" forward from DeSoto High School here in Texas. She was All-State this year and won a state championship in her junior year. The final player, Jakalinga Mwinatanda, who recently earned South Dakota Player of the Year as a 6'2" guard. She has great ball handling skills and the size on the perimeter that Vic Schaefer covets. Like I said before, the future is bright for the Longhorns.
Exciting things on the horizon, on the 40 acres indeed. So thank you, as always, for joining us tonight. And when we return on College Press Box, Cecilia Rodriguez will join us to recap Texas baseball's weekend in Lubbock. We'll be right back. Welcome back into College Press Box. Over the weekend, Texas baseball faced the daunting task of heading to Lubbock to take on the 16th ranked Texas Tech Red Raiders. And to discuss this past weekend in Lubbock, we welcome in our baseball analyst, Cecilia Rodriguez. Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. Love to talk about baseball.
So what was your biggest takeaway from this opening conference series against Texas Tech?
Well, going into this series, the Longhorns, their strongest competitors up until this point was UCLA and South Carolina, both unranked teams. And although the Longhorns did well in those games, they really struggled to find their rhythm. Texas was still playing strong, consistent baseball, even on the road, despite those few losses. This opening conference series was a test for the celebrated Texas team that up until this point had been dominant in non-conference games. And the 16th ranked Texas Tech was not going to let them leave Lubbock without a fight, and ultimately the Longhorns fell short, losing the series 2-1. The biggest takeaway from the series is that the Texas baseball team is not dominant against stronger competition and stronger defenses. It was evident in Game 2 during the bottom of the first inning, where it was just it was endless, almost like endless inning. And Texas defense surprisingly crumbled, allowing 7 runs to come in and a total of 16 runs by the end of the game. And although there's a long season of baseball left and it's more than enough time for the Longhorns to improve before tournament time.
7 runs in the first inning is never the way that you want to start a game. So what would you say has been the biggest issue for Texas so far, although we're just in the beginning of conference play?
What stands out is how complacent this team gets when they're playing. You see it in games against less competitive teams or lower ranked teams. We saw it especially in the game against Texas State. They won in strong fashion that first night, but in the second game, they just kind of struggled to really get that rhythm again, and they just kind of slacked off and ended up losing that game at home, which was really sting for this team. And the Bobcats ultimately run away with it. These careless mistakes will cost them in high-stakes game that decides, a trip to Omaha in June. You can't let that happen, especially that close to the tournament. The Longhorns are going to need to keep on playing at their best, especially as they face stronger competition in conference play.
No kidding. With 3 other Big 12 teams ranked in the top 10, the competition will only get stronger. So let me hear one player that stands out on the offensive side of the ball and one player that stands out on the defensive side of the ball for you throughout the rest of the season.
Well, for me, it has to be Mr. Slugger himself, Ivan Melendez. Melendez, as of now, has a .402 hitting percentage, 13 home runs and counting up until this point, and a on-base percentage of .528. Defensively, he's been solid at first base. It's also important to note that he's transitioning to this position of first baseman, taking over for Zach Zubia, who left last season declaring for the draft. Melendez is in one of his best seasons yet and earned a Big 12 Player of the Week last week after hitting 4 home runs in 4 games. He has himself a great season so far, and I can't wait to see what he does as we get closer to tournament time.
So can I, Cece. Thank you so much for joining us to talk a little Texas baseball. And when we return, Tommy Yarrish will join us to give us his rundown of NFL free agency to this point of the offseason. You certainly won't want to miss it. We'll be right back. Welcome back into College Press Box. Every year, the NFL offseason features a flurry of new faces moving to new places, retirements, trades, and the like. However, this NFL offseason has truly been something else. Luckily, we are now joined by Tommy Yarrish, who is here to summarize this past month's madness. Take it away, Tommy.
Thanks, Jason. This NFL offseason has had its fireworks left and right as always since the jump, and it's crazy to think that we still have almost a month left. With never-before-seen contracts being signed, teams rounding out their rosters in an attempt to create a championship roster, or even start the rebuild process, free agents heading to different homes, and so much more. With that in mind, let's take a look at the top 5 offseason moves thus far. We're going to start off at number 5, the Bills picking up Von Miller. I think it's safe to say that the Bills are in shape to win a Super Bowl right now. After a heartbreaking loss in overtime against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, it felt like many people forgot just how good this Buffalo team was, boasting the #1 defense in 2021, allowing a league-best 289 points, causing 30 turnovers, and allowing just 4.6 yards per play, the only team in the league with an average below 5 yards in that category. All of that to go with an offense that was 5th in the league in yards, 3rd in points per game, and has one of the best young quarterbacks across the entire league in Josh Allen. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? A team that was a few pieces away from winning a championship, one free agent away from taking it all. The Los Angeles Rams were in those shoes a few years ago after their loss to Tom Brady and the Patriots in the Super Bowl. And then they hit the free agency market to craft a championship roster. Who was one of the instrumental players in that period for LA? Von Miller. Who did the Bills just sign to a 6-year, $120 million deal? Von Miller. Putting him alongside Aaron Donald with the Rams was a nightmare for opposing offenses, and things will most likely play out the same way in Buffalo. Miller is a two-time champion who will be a great mentor for younger guys like Ed Oliver and Shaq Lawson, so don't be surprised if Miller's signing ends up being like the last piece of the puzzle for the Bills to finally end their Super Bowl drought and win a championship. Moving on to number 4. There's a lot to unpack about this move. Former Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson headed to Cleveland. He still faces the 22 civil lawsuits and will more than likely be suspended after serious sexual misconduct allegations surfaced last year. However, when a Harris County grand jury determined there wasn't enough evidence to charge Watson, trade talks quickly came about, and it ended up being the Browns coming away with Watson. They traded 3 first-round picks, a 2023 third-round pick, and a 2024 fourth-round pick to the Texans in order to get him. With a lot of question marks surrounding Watson's future, the biggest one from a football standpoint is, how good is he after not playing for over a year and likely longer with an incoming suspension? Baker Mayfield is still with the Browns and will likely be the starter in Watson's absence, but when and if he returns, Cleveland added some nice pieces around him for the offensive side, including Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. Cooper is one of the league's best route runners and will bring a consistency on offense that the Browns have been looking for quite some time. Despite a slight down year after back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, Cooper is a great addition to the offense and pairs nicely with Jarvis Landry should Landry elect to stay in Cleveland. Not to mention Pro Bowl running back Nick Chubb in the backfield, who has shouldered the load for the Browns offensively with 3 straight 1,000-yard rushing seasons. There are so many different directions that the Browns could go with this offseason, but there is a glimmer of hope for a franchise that has been hungry for a deep playoff run. Moving on to number 3, Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, and Mike Williams going to the Chargers. They're in a somewhat similar boat as the Bills in the sense that they're a really good team that's just a few steps away from winning a Super Bowl, and this offseason they made 2 moves that pushed them in the right direction. Number 1 was acquiring Khalil Mack from the Chicago Bears for a 2022 second-round pick and a 2023 sixth-rounder. That doesn't seem like a lot to give up for a former All-Pro linebacker, and it's even better now pairing him on the defensive line with Joey Bosa along the edges. Mack just played 7 games last year for the Bears due to injury and received season-ending foot surgery back in November. In those 7 games, though, several of which he played through injury, Mack still managed to put up 19 tackles with 6 sacks and 6 tackles for loss. Those 6 sacks were the most he's had through the first 6 games in his entire career. So it's safe to say that once fully healthy, Mack will still present the same problems to opposing defenses that he did in Chicago. We'll take it back one level to the secondary. The Chargers also signed former Patriots cornerback J.C. Jackson to a 5-year, $82.5 million deal. The 26-year-old is a fresh star amongst a talented group of defensive backs in the league and had a stellar season this past year with 8 interceptions and league-leading 23 pass defenses, earning him his first Pro Bowl nod and a second-team All-Pro placement. Jackson now teams up with Derwin James in the Los Angeles secondary, forming a well-rounded defense with 2 ball-hawk defensive backs primed to force turnovers. Offensively, Justin Herbert only continues to rise to stardom for the Chargers, with receiver Mike Williams back on a 3-year, $60 million deal, on the heels of his best season yet, and not to mention already having weapons like Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler alongside him. Moving on to number 2 on our list, it's the big one, Russell Wilson to the Broncos. This was a trade that had been in the making for quite some time now, but it's nonetheless weird to think that it actually went through. The Seahawks traded quarterback Russell Wilson in a 5th rounder to Denver for Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, and 5 draft picks, 2 of them being first rounders. The Broncos roster was already well-rounded before Wilson came along, with a great receiving room housing Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, and Tim Patrick, not to mention a great offensive line, which makes a quarterback's job easy, and that's why Russell Wilson fits right in. He has by no means fallen off with back-to-back 4,000-yard seasons just 2 years ago, and sometimes players going to a new place is a refresher of sorts for their careers, and that's certainly what this situation is shaping up to be with Russell Wilson. Adding guys like Randy Gregory on defense only makes this roster even better, as Denver already holds good defensive talent in players like Bradley Chubb, Patrick Surtain, and Justin Simmons. With a few more key free agents left in play, it'll be interesting to see if Denver signs any other notable names. But for now, they've put themselves in a position to make a playoff run thanks to a good mix of veteran, experienced players mixed with young, talented stars. And at the number 1 spot, big shocker this offseason, Davante Adams heading to Las Vegas. They say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, it looks like former Packers wide receiver Davante Adams is going to be staying there for quite some time after being traded to the Raiders for a first and second round pick in the 2022 draft and signing a 5-year, $140 million extension to play with Derek Carr, who was also his quarterback and close friend during his college days at Fresno State. This was a blockbuster move after Adams told his former team he wouldn't play under the franchise tag even with teammate and reigning league MVP Aaron Rodgers signing back with the Packers on a 3-year, $150 million deal. Adams wanted a fresh start, and he got one while he's playing in his prime, coming off a 1,500-yard receiving season to go along with 11 touchdowns. He takes the cake for me in free agency rankings because he's incredibly difficult to guard, as his versatile game and strong route tree allow him to do so much against anything a defense throws at him. The Raiders' offense gets their wide receiver one after a season filled with drama and plot twists, and with offensive components like Josh Jacobs and Darren Waller, alongside Carr and Adams, there are plenty of options on the offensive side. Now on the defensive side, they got a huge splash in former Arizona Cardinals defensive lineman Chandler Jones, inking a 3-year, $52.5 million deal for him to join Max Crosby on what is set to be a tough front seven in Vegas. That's all I've got, Jason. Back over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Tommy. When we return, we will take a look at the last week in Texas sports. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back into College Press Box. Over the weekend, a pair of former Longhorns, Jordan Spieth and Scotty Scheffler, competed in the WGC Dell Technologies Match Play event at Austin Country Club. Scheffler would go on to win the event in his old stomping grounds, defeating Kevin Kisner in the Sunday finale to earn the win and the title of the top-ranked golfer in the world. Texas men's swim and dive finished as a national runner-up in the NCAA championships on Saturday, marking Texas's 8th consecutive top 2 championship finish. Senior Drew Kibler led the way for the Longhorns, placing in the 200-meter freestyle individual event, as well as the 400 and 800-meter freestyle relays. 10th-ranked Texas men's tennis defeated 30th-ranked Oklahoma on Sunday by the score of 5-2. Sophomores Micah Braswell, Siem Woldiab, and Elliot Spizziri led the way with singles wins, marking the 3rd consecutive win as a team for Texas. Top-ranked Texas rowing swept 4 finals at the San Diego Crew Classic over the weekend. The Longhorns outlasted top teams such as 3rd-ranked Washington and 9th-ranked California. Texas has now won their first 2 meets of the season and will compete next against 3rd-ranked Michigan on April 9th. Let's take a look at what we have in store for this week of Texas sports. On Tuesday, baseball will welcome in arch rival Texas A&M for a 6:30 first pitch that can be seen on Longhorn Network. On Wednesday, softball will take on Louisiana at 6 p.m. on Longhorn Network. Both of those games are at home. Friday, softball will take on Iowa State at home, 6 p.m. Longhorn Network again. Men's tennis will take on Baylor at 6 p.m. Baseball will head to Norman to take on the Oklahoma Sooners in the first of 3. That game can be seen at 6:30 p.m. on Sooner Sports TV. And for the weekend, baseball will continue their 3-game weekend stretch against Oklahoma. Saturday's game can be seen at noon on ESPN2, while Sunday's game will also be at noon but can be seen on ESPNU. Softball will continue their 3-game home set against Iowa State. Saturday's game will be at 1 p.m. on Longhorn Network. Sunday's game at 12 p.m. on Longhorn Network. Men's tennis will take on Texas Tech at noon on Longhorn Network. And finally, men's tennis will finish their own doubleheader on Sunday, taking on Texas Rio Grande Valley at 4:30. And that will wrap things up for this week's episode of College Press Box. Please make sure to tune in to our other shows this week, including College Crossfire on Wednesday and the 1-0 Sports Show on Friday. On behalf of all the crew here at Texas Student Television, I'm Jason Kinander. Thank you for joining us, and have a great night.